Hey, this is Jamey with Stonemaier Games, and I am so excited to talk about Dwellings of Eldervale with you today. This is a game that I really wanted to play last year. It came out last year, or at least the Kickstarter version came out, and I haven't been able to play it, but a friend learned it, borrowed it, and taught it to me at a game day last week, and I had a blast playing it. Here's what it looks like. I don't have the copy itself, but here's what it looks like on this map that we built during the game. Here's some cards that I acquired, my tableau of workers and different things here, resources in this tray. You can see the magic board out there. I'll hold this up here while I talk. Beautiful game, a lot going on. Let me jump right to my favorite mechanism, and then I'll talk about a few other things. This is one of my favorite styles of worker placement games, which is that there are no rounds. All you do on your turn is either place a worker on the board or retrieve one or more workers from the board. I've used this mechanism in Euphoria and Charterstone so far. I think it works really well. And I was actually just playing Charterstone the other day, and as much as I enjoy the simplicity of the retrieval turn, after I actually played it after I played Dwellings of Eldervale, and the retrieval turns felt less fun. I'll just say it. Charterstone is my game, but they felt less fun than in Dwellings of Eldervale, because in Dwellings of Eldervale, when you retrieve your workers, you actually have these private worker placement spots that you're placing them on as you retrieve them. Excuse me. So as you retrieve these workers, you're actually taking most likely a more powerful turn than you would than if you were placing those workers on the board. Especially since if you're retrieving more than one worker, then you're getting to place more than one worker on these private action spots. And even better than that, I mean, that itself will be by itself really, really cool. In addition to that, you can upgrade those private action spots. You can get more of them, and you can upgrade the ones that you have. And so over the course of the game, your retrieve turns become more and more powerful. Now, paired with that is also another mechanism that I like that actually goes hand in hand with it, which is that sometimes some of the workers that you're placing on the board, the actual worker meeples, will become dwellings. And this is a key way, this is a big way to get endgame points. So, in placing workers on the board and at some point on your turn turning them into dwellings, those are fewer workers that you were retrieving and using for those powerful retrieve turns. So I think that in itself is really clever too. That there's this sense of sacrifice of giving up these workers and turning them into dwellings. You're putting like a little cap on them that makes it look like a house instead of a meeple. So they're literally turning into houses. You no longer have that meeple available. But you end up getting a bunch of points from it. So it's a lot about timing. When do you want to do that? Do you do it early because another player might build a dwelling on that same territory? There can only be one on the territory, or do you wait until later and have more workers to place and retrieve over the course of the game? Another thing tied to this as well, I'll just tie all the mechanisms to this favorite mechanism, is that there's combat in this game, and I'll talk about combat in a second. But if you lose combat, the workers that essentially die in combat, they go to the underworld. You get to retrieve them, but not for worker placement. So combat has these interesting stakes in that combat is generally fairly low stakes. You don't really lose all that much, but you do lose those workers temporarily. So they're not dying, so it doesn't feel that bad to lose combat, but you are losing the possibility of using those workers for your retrieve turns, that retrieve worker placement action that I talked about. But you still get to pull them back and use them on future turns for normal worker placement. So I like how all those things tie together to this retrieve turn. It works really, really well. I'd love to see that in other games. Even if you don't do all the cool stuff that it does with this, just the idea that you have, when you're on a retrieve turn, that there are things that you can gain that are beneficial to you, rather than just sacrificing a turn to pull your workers off the board. What else do I really love here? The game trays. I do want to give a shout out to the game trays. So the game trays are integral to the game. I think they're actually integral to the success of the game, because setup would be a beast if you didn't have these game trays. They make setup so much easier for each of the factions and for the cards. There are lots of different decks of cards in this game, but because they're organized in the trays, it makes setup so much easier, much more accessible. There are monsters in this game. So not only are you fighting other players, but occasionally you will be fighting monsters. And one little twist to this that I really, really love, because at first when Miles was teaching this game, he put one of these big monsters on the board, and I thought, okay, for the rest of the game, we just have to deal with this monster. Similar to, say, in Yedo, where you have this tiny autonomous worker that goes around the board and blocks spaces for the rest of the game. However, in this game, you can kill that monster. If you win combat against the monster, you kill it. You remove it from the board permanently. And so it's this really nice, this moment of removing this thing that was being a nuisance to you in the game, And not only are you helping yourself, but you're also helping other players, which feels nice too. Positive player interaction there. In the combat itself, though, there's a mechanism that I think is really, really clever because combat is super fast, and combat needs to be fast in this game because it definitely adds to the length of the turn. But basically, the main thing that you were doing in combat is rolling X number of D6 dice. And you compare your highest die to the other player. So basically, if I roll 5 dice, and you roll 3 dice, and you roll 1 6, and I don't roll any 6s, you have the highest die, and you win the combat. I really like how this works. And it might, I think, throw off some Euro players a little bit, but I really like that you have a chance whenever you are in combat. You could go enter combat with only 1 die, knowing that you only have 1 die, and go against someone with 6 dice, and you have the possibility of winning. So that feels good, even though the odds are heavily against that. You can also mitigate the dice a little bit. There are some spell cards that maybe add a 6 at the end of combat. You can also spend swords to roll extra dice, things like that, little things to mitigate it. But I just really like the idea that generally the person throwing more dice, because they have the better odds, they are going to win combat. But you always have a chance of winning combat without even doing like exploding dice style things that prolong combat. It's just a single roll and you see who wins. So I think combat actually works really, really well in this game. Also, one of the little twists I like in this game, you can't really see it here. I played the goblins. You can see my mat over here. But there are different types of workers in this game, and each worker has a little twist to it. There's a wizard, there's a barbarian, there's a dragon worker, meeple, and then you have a bunch of regular workers. So a bunch of different meeples, and a lot of them are actually workers, but you have these 3 other types as well. And they each have things that are slightly unique to them for all players, but also on your asymmetric player mat, 2 of those types of workers have something that's unique to them specifically. And the other 2 don't have special things, don't have asymmetric elements. And I really like this. I really like that they didn't give every faction 4 different asymmetric things to pay attention to. Rather, they give you 2. And it's just it's a really clever, I think, design point to not overwhelm players with too much asymmetry, but just having a little bit and making you feel special when, in my game, when I made that dragon or when I made that wizard. And I had to pay attention to those things, those additional abilities throughout the game, but I didn't need to pay attention to even more than that. I really like that. I like that they held back a little bit with the asymmetry, and that made the game, I think, more accessible and really more memorable because I had these 2 special things instead of 4 special things that kind of got mixed together and jumbled together. So I thought that was really clever. And finally, one last thing that I really enjoyed in the game, it adds to setup a bit, but whenever you put a tile on the board, a hex tile, you also put these tiny tokens, these cardboard tokens on top of that tile, and they represent what you gather when you go there. So if I put a worker there, I can gather one of those tokens and do a couple things with the tokens. And the thing I really like here, despite the fiddliness of actually setting up those tokens, is that when you gain that token here, you can see them here, you're storing them in these 4 slots here on this player mat, and they're versatile. They're not just resources, so they can be resources. I have one here that gives me a magic or an axe. I can spend that at any time for a magic, whatever it is, a potion or we'll call it magic or an axe. I can spend it at any time for that purpose. Or I can place that token on various cards, especially those retrieve cards I was talking about. I can place it to upgrade that action permanently. So I really like the choice here. I like that I have these tokens at any time. If I need the resource, I can just spend it. Or I can use that token for a permanent ongoing upgrade by placing it on one of the cards that has a corresponding slot for it. I really like the versatility there. That was a really nice touch as well. A lot going on in this game. I haven't even touched upon all the mechanisms, but I love all those things. I love how they come together in the game, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What is your favorite mechanism in Dwellings of Eldervale? Maybe one that you would like to see in other games as well. These are some of mine. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Thanks.